Right. The next panel is a live jamming session on intent-centric applications.
Yeah, thanks, Alwa, and thanks everybody for coming. I am going to have the pleasure of introducing some of these lovely panelists. We're going to be talking about intent-centric applications, so a little bit of a change of speed from the infra layer, and really thinking about how we bring intents to the application layer, how we ultimately get users. And I hope to delve into things about not only existing applications, but potentially novel applications, how we improve the UX today, which I think is a key feature of using intent-based programming. But I will kick it over to the panelists first to introduce themselves, maybe just a little bit about yourself and what you're building.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Rob. I'm an investor over at Bull Capital. To keep it relatively simple, we invest in seed and pre-seed, and focusing on just reimagining our systems, whether it be financial or cultural.
I'm Zaki, co-founder of Sommelier Protocol. We make a system for an infrastructure for sort of intelligent rebalancing vaults, but work on lots of different things in the space. Intents have actually turned out to be particularly useful in the design of something like Sommelier, and a lot of why intents are important have sort of come from the experience of building applications. So I think this is a sort of relevant piece of the sort of conceptual space.
Hey, this is Praneeth. I'm an investment partner at Ethereal Ventures, which is an early stage venture firm that spun out of the investing team at Consensus. And from our standpoint, I think we are broadly curious about what intents can add to applications, given this is pretty much what powers a lot of the applications that we see today in terms of their interactions across different systems. So I'm glad to be here.
Hi there. Oh, it's loud. I'm Amin. We're working on SwissDAO, building community in Zurich, builder community. Also researching right now decentralized AI MEV, working with intents for quite a while without knowing that it's actually intents. And yeah, taking more the dev builder hat from this panel. So yeah.
Nice. So in my role at Heliax, I really work on ecosystem development at Anoma. And what does that mean? That really means talking to builders, talking to people that ultimately want to use the Anoma architecture to build applications and to grow that ecosystem through that. So just as an opening question, I'm wondering how you guys are seeing, because in my seat, I'm seeing intents really starting to take off in terms of builder teams. People are thinking about it, whether it's still early or actionable, but they're definitely thinking about how they integrate that into their applications. So I'm just wondering at a high level how you guys are seeing the landscape develop, and either how are you thinking about intents from building your own applications or more as a market overview and landscape development. But maybe Zaki, you might want to kick it off in how you're thinking about it from the Sommelier angle. Yeah, so I'll just say that this comes from a set of sort of practical problems that you encounter in protocol design. So one practical problem that we've had with Sommelier was that we frequently had sort of a vault containing mostly illiquid positions. And so when a user wanted liquidity, when the user wanted to withdraw a deposit, the strategist had to make some decisions about where to pull liquidity from. And for probably the first year that we were live, the state of the art for doing this was if you want to withdraw, you put a message in Discord being this is how much we want to withdraw, and eventually the strategist comes across and does this, and it was a sort of very inelegant system. So we built a very simple intent framework that was basically I'm willing to withdraw, I'm willing to pay this much, and basically it allowed for this sort of asynchronous, sort of minimal communication, fully on-chain communication between our users and the strategist who was in the position of essentially solving for this, and it allowed for essentially doing this in a way that maximized performance for all the users in the vault. Relatively simple thing. I think like another thing that like got me thinking a lot about intents was, well, as we've expanded cross-chain, and like now we have vaults on Arbitrum, we have vaults on Optimism, we have vaults on ETH mainnet. We're n number of L2s. This will all is all sort of coming together. This idea of, hey, like I'm a user, I have an asset on chain X, I want to use a vault on chain Y. The idea that a user would have to like figure out how to move their liquidity and like obtain the right asset and like enter the vault is completely insane. And so, we wouldn't, that would be another place that we've been sort of searching for the right solution. I don't think the intent ecosystem has given us exactly what we want, but we're continuing to search for that solution. So I think there's like a lot of practical problems that you run into in sort of the design of different protocols, where intents are like a nice little piece. And like more like sort of reusable intent building blocks in like a variety of different frameworks would be like, I think like hugely enabling across the entire ecosystem. We've had to build our own. They're not that complicated, but like I wish there was more of like a sort of like intent, I don't know, SDK or like soulmate for intents that was out there. They were like, here's a bunch of simple building blocks that you can integrate with. But anyways, that was a long rant.
Maybe someone wants to chip in from the investment landscape of how you guys are seeing the general application kind of development.
Yeah, I'll jump in. From the investment side of things, I think there are tons of teams that are labeling themselves as intent-centric protocols, which I think is kind of like a poor way of doing it. I think this new paradigm, if we really take a step back, this is something we've had for the past probably 10 to 15 years at a minimum. The more declarative paradigm where you see with like Uber, Airbnb, any of these more applications, and DoorDash itself. So it's really taking those principles and the different design patterns they built out and now figuring out how can we do this in a trustless way. And I think there's very few teams who are actually building in this direction. From the application side, another thing that I just kind of like keep in a more mental model is like from the user's perspective, 99% of the individuals who interact with crypto don't want to like understand and figure out that they're even using crypto. So this is where intents and these different workflows can kind of like really be optimized for. So looking for teams in this space who are thinking about it in the right way, and also from like a base layer and the different workflows that need to be created. So.
I can speak a little about, also from a user standpoint, I think when people generally think about interacting with systems that they don't understand, we have layers of abstraction and commitments to what each specific service will give them. So when we're using Uber, for instance, or if it's a B2B marketplace of sorts, what ends up happening is you end up making a commitment to a specific set of constraints that you impose, and then you expect service providers to do something similar and act within the constraints of the space that they're in and deliver the solution. And then there's not much that you think about as a user about what's happening behind the scenes, really. And that's a very natural state of the world that people are very, very used to in a lot of senses. And that's something that broadly makes sense when you want to start thinking about parameterizing like these commitments and commitment games that we have, and give people like the ability to choose what they want to know about a system that they're interacting with, and choose to think about abstraction, which is a fundamental computing primitive, the way we see it. So from that standpoint, I think we've been working with apps like CowSwap and maybe Connect and across, where we've been trying to work with infrastructure providers that try and eliminate some of these product gaps. But I think it makes broader sense for application developers to fundamentally realize what exactly they want attribution for and what they do not. And a lot of this can ultimately be not constrained by the underlying settlement systems that they're working towards. So that's what we would like to see more of, really.
Just building on that, I think it's quite intuitive how intents can, I think, further application verticals like DeFi, right? Like, it's quite understandable. But what I'm personally very interested in, and what Anoma has spent a lot of time in, and I encourage people to check out our research blogs, is novel applications that intent-centricity can enable. And I'm wondering, from your guys' view, in a perfect world, where do you think intents can take us? What kind of cool applications or unique applications do you think can be launched? Maybe Amin, who's been looking at intents without even knowing it for a while, has some thoughts there.
Well, in all fairness, I'm rather than you. So I might just give an example, something we hacked together recently at ETH Berlin that was basically about the matchmaking overall. Just, you put out an intent, you want to talk to a certain person, be matched with a certain kind of individual, but you don't want to swipe all the time on the dating app or just type in tedious stuff. Therefore, it would be interesting to see more agent-focused intent matching systems that kind of take that for you. It's been talked about, but not built yet. So I think that's something we might see in the near future as another use case of intents overall matchmaking. I don't know, how do you guys see it?
I really fantasize about a world in which what a world, and a lot of the way I think about it is more like what the internet was like in the 90s. When the internet was a lot smaller, you had Craigslist was just this bulletin board in which you could essentially sort of matchmake between all kinds of different weird preference functions. It was the way that everybody's from this is a weird rental property, or every sort of odd parameter of human desires could sort of be articulated. But then as the internet scaled, just having all of this on just a web, on essentially a bulletin board, made it so that no one would ever be able to find each other, and that payments and reputation and all of these things became so this all pulled all of matchmaking into centralized marketplace platforms. And then the other thing is eBay in the 90s was just this crazy place where you could buy anything. And I think that there's kind of wanting to get back to this universal marketplace rather than a bunch of siloed, segmented marketplaces that only do one thing. It's exciting. I think it's a really exciting it's an exciting thing that could exist and be sort of not really relevant to what we think of as a crypto application today.
Yeah, one thing to add to that that you said, I think really building around desire is key here. Humans have all forms of desires, whether you want to buy something, like something, obtain it in some way, different colors. There's so many different preferences that you can have that create different communities, and I think that's global marketplace where you can have these different transactions or commitments across and just value transfer back and forth. There's unique ways to kind of build it out. I think there's, if you go to the research forum at Anoma, there's tons of different examples, which is great, but I think starting off in a small community and slowly expanding, going back to that bulletin board of the Craigslist side of things is something that I think would be pretty interesting for teams to tackle early on.
Yeah, the one thing I would think about that is of interest is fundamentally connecting domains that are not able to be represented accurately in each state, so to speak. So it's again the problem of Oracle, so to speak. But the idea being, if, for instance, I had to make a payment in the real world that had to unlock something on the blockchain or vice versa, I think there's still fundamental constraints in terms of ensuring that these commitments are reflected accurately. I think we're getting there, but with some form of cryptographic commitments. But I think even something as fundamentally simple as unlocking a loan in fiat for crypto collateral that's deposited in escrow is still fundamentally hard to reconcile across other currencies and other payment rails. And so this is a simple example where you need to have representations of commitments in a given domain that need to get reflected in another. And this could be in and of itself like a system where you express these as intents, and this is something that solvers take care for you, or your agents take care, and make sure that they satisfy these, or they have something at stake to lose.
Yeah, and just picking up on something there, in the way that these intents are expressed to solvers, like, how do you guys ultimately see interfaces developing here for users? Are they going to be talking to, autonomous agents that are then delivering their intents to solvers? Or, I think this is one of the most interesting facets of intent-centric applications, is what the actual interface will look like. Yeah, any thoughts there, maybe, Amin, or?
I think like the entry barrier will be way deeper to like a user, non-crypto user being in the space, like interacting with a dApp or something. I do see the agentic kind of agent approach rather realistic in like the next 2 years, whereas you would have like the agentic representation of for whatever you want to do or get done in that sense, overall reducing the friction on the UX and DevX, of course. Of course, we need to add some more complexity in setting up your environment, your dApp, your setup on the dev side. That's something I'm not looking forward to, honestly, but it's going to be more efficient for sure.
Yes, on the user side, I feel users should be much more fundamentally comfortable interacting with systems that have different layers of complexity. This is something that we do on a daily basis, knowingly or unknowingly. But from that standpoint, I'm just even curious about the notion of discoverability that you might encounter. For instance, when you think about routing, really in the real world, when you start with a starting point and a destination, and then you get a route, say on Google Maps or Apple Maps, and then you discover things or different experiences, and there's a scope to do that within the constraint of the route that you set. So I'm curious about people who are not just willing to reduce latency for some of these experiences, but in fact increase those and see if there's a mechanism to reflect other user preferences as part of this routing that's done, and give users something more as part of what they're doing in these applications.
One of the things I guess I am fairly certain of is that users will not express their preferences through like a general purpose intents app. Instead, there will be like largely special purpose apps that like narrow the preference space and the constraint space, both towards things that are like actually solvable. So like the apps, essentially are like the app developers learning like what kinds of preferences are actually going to like find people to like essentially to solve for them. Because like the worst user experience is like, I want to accomplish something, but like I have a complete blank slate in terms of preferences, and like I'm going to express a set of preferences for which there are no one will solve for. And so like one of the things I think a lot of front-end app developers essentially will play the role of is like narrowing the constraint space into things that are like, and like slowly expanding the frontier as like more possible solutions expand, but like kind of not giving users that like blank page problem. So, but like what is exciting about like intent-centric infrastructure is you could have a variety of different apps with a variety of different preference functions, all feeding into the same sort of both like transmission of orders and like sort of like moving those orders into venues that can actually like match them with solvers and execute them. And then that entire ecosystem can be evolving dynamically while the user interface stays static. It's not like where it's like, today I was trying to get from the Brussels suburbs into like Brussels city center, and I opened 6 different travel apps, Uber, Get, Free Now, Bolt, until like eventually I found one that would actually plausibly get me where I was going. But like that entire so like we're like the order book and the who is willing to make those orders is so tied to the front end of the app, and so therefore you need like 6 apps to plan an hour-long journey. And this is like a really suboptimal place from like a design of markets and a design. Whereas what you would want is like, yes, there could be many apps and some of them specialize in like shaping your preferences in simple way and will let you express different preferences. But like there could be just one app that drivers use and like essentially pull all the order flow that matches for them.
I like to also think about it in terms of like the stakeholders, so the solvers themselves, and them becoming more expressive. So one model that I kind of work through is like, if I have an apartment in New York, typically you're given the choice of having Optimum or Verizon. Like those are relationships that are already built in for your cable provider or internet. And those relationships are kind of how I view these different apps that will pop up that are more intent-centric. Like they have the relationships with a lot of these different solvers. Some solvers specialize with certain user preferences, and those are going to be the ones that have that respective order flow going forward. So I think that's just something to keep in mind, is that from the user perspective, they might prefer something to be faster, and there might only be X amount of like apps that provide that, and that's going to push whether it be like, I like this brand better, I like this, maybe the colors of a like project, or like I want to be fast execution. So I think all those different preferences can be executed that way.
Nice. And I guess just from like a barriers to entry or friction standpoint, like this is obviously a new way of thinking about transactions or interacting with the blockchain more generally, both from a user, but probably maybe even more importantly from a developer perspective. I'm just wondering how you guys view the barriers here, or the adjustment period more specifically. Like, do you think this can happen quickly? Is this over time? Like, do you see already existing applications porting over to intent-centric architectures, or do you think it's more of a ground-up build of new applications?
Okay, I have my current set of takes, which is, I think the biggest barrier is the amount of infrastructure you have to build today. If you want to, so like if you want to build something intent-centric and you want to have like a diversity of market makers and solvers, like so you've got to like figure out your intent format on chain. You have to then like write a server that is going to like store that's going to like take orders from your front end, but also then like make those orders available on some API, and then you're going to have to like onboard various market participants into those orders. It's like a huge amount of work, and I think that has like practically like one of the biggest barriers to building with intents. And I think there's like sort of two reasons to be bullish on sort of people moving towards more general architecture, which is one is I think there's like a regulatory surface area to having like all of that's infrastructure being bespoke, and all of it having like living on one server that's in one jurisdiction somewhere. And I think the other reason is I think like Somm would use intents for more things if like we didn't have to like spin up all of this additional infrastructure that is like maybe of marginal value to our protocol, because like right now, I mean, if you're reconciling liquidity between like the like 15 different flavors of ETH that exist on L2s, like there's a good business there, and that's the 80-20 of like intent architectures right now. But they've had to build a lot of infrastructure for that, and it would be useful for other things, but you don't want to like build your own version of that.
Anybody else on that one? Just on the kind of adjustment period as you guys are seeing it?
I think in some way, shape, and sense, I fully agree with what Zaki's viewpoint here is. I think the notion of counterparty discovery, the notion of finding people who can do optimal routing for a set of constraints that you have is going to be fundamentally constraining. And so I think the reason why we are so bullish on intents broadly is we feel that people need to focus on developing proper applications where people and users use the product for the sake of the product experience that they get. And once we get the ability to express these kinds of preferences that users and these applications might seek in a more generalized manner, I think at least having a framework for doing this might be helpful towards getting people to use and collaborate with different participants in the stack to kind of get things moving. So you could have solvers focused on like fulfilling liquidity needs, but later on you could have solvers kind of come in and focus on serving time and availability in other services and maybe even other solvers. But even having the notion of a framework where you can express some of all of this is going to be extremely helpful in getting people to really build applications and not really think about being constrained by the capabilities of the systems that they're looking to build these on.
And I've heard, just through the conversation here, a lot of kind of chat about what I call real world or maybe even Web 2 applications, so stuff like Uber or your journey into town today. And I think, at least from my standpoint, that's been one area that Web 3 hasn't solved for yet is kind of broad-based real-world applications. So I'm wondering, this could be a bit of a loaded question, but are intents or intent-centric applications the kind of breakthrough moment where this technology perhaps goes to a wider user base and we have the propagation of various novel applications?
I think yes, but with a caveat that there's typically 5 applications that people use every day of like the mainstream, and the 6th one always rotates depending on the flavor of the month or some form of meme. So it's really breaking into like a mainstream app, I think will be quite difficult early on, but an intent-centric design and architecture is the best like one-to-one comparison to what we have in these more traditional apps that are used by the conglomerates that we mentioned before. So I do think like it's probably the best bet to kind of break through beyond kind of the standard like stablecoins aspect of things.
I also think we're still rather early-ish with the entire intent-centric architecture idea. Like it's being used in DeFi for sure, but like having more like new devs, earlier stage devs, having an idea of what it is, how they can make use of it, how they can extend, build on a hackathon with it, that's still about to come. So I think that we will see also in the near future. I was surprised that there wasn't that much documentation around how you can make use of it, like just like in a non-DeFi related application or use case. So I think partially also with more education and content coming out there, you will potentially see more of it out there.
So I guess I'm hopeful that there's like a synthesis of like all of the Web3 infrastructure that has been built and sort of breaking out of like so like I think of basically like Web3 currently has like 4 products, which is like volatility, yield, like leverage, and payments. And these are like like everything we do so far just is like a repackaging of these sort of things. And the question is whether or not intents are like a significant bridge out of like those 4 product categories into so like the crypto native arguments are like, we take those 4 products, we make them better, we make them easier to use via intents. The second question is can we use those products as infrastructure, as a pure infrastructure thing, but like breaks out of the product experience being primarily driven by like those 4 human desires or like those 4 human needs. And like sort of any sort of marketplace app needs payments infrastructure. And so the fact that we have this like robust payments infrastructure is important. So yeah.
Okay, good. I think we probably have time for a couple more questions. I think one thing I'll delve into quickly is just like the ZK aspects or privacy when it comes to intent-centric apps. I think Zaki mentioned it before, but users don't tend to express their preferences. But do you guys think that that's an important facet of this technology and the ability to at least provision your privacy as you choose to some degree?
I can quickly start. I think this is more a personal inclination, but one of my motivations and one of my beliefs with crypto and its values is that we can fundamentally break away from recreating market structures as they stand. And if that is something that we need to incorporate, we need to start thinking about incorporating privacy from every level of the stack. And having a notion where you could think about doing counterparty discovery or fetching state in a manner that doesn't really kind of give out more information about what you want besides what you want really is going to be very, very important in architecting these kinds of systems. And I feel this is something that we should espouse. This is something that we should believe in, or at least architect towards systems where we could have these kinds of capabilities, where users could choose to offload whatever they want to offload, but not really give up more information than they really care about.
I guess one big picture question, just to wrap it up. I think, the kind of old adage of less infra, more apps. I think we've spent a lot of time, resource, effort on infra, and I'm wondering if these intent-centric applications actually allow the onboarding of many new developers and kind of balance those scales out in terms of not only unlocking new applications, but onboarding a lot of new devs that can more easily work with this technology and kind of, get a more balanced landscape. Do intent-centric applications essentially allow to onboard more devs and balance the scales between kind of the infra and application development that's happening in the Web3 space?
Well, yeah, I hope if they're documented well enough, then we can get there. No, yeah.
I don't know. There's always a glass-eating phase of anything new, right? And I suspect that it'll be like sort of Web3 devs that do most of the glass-eating in the initial era of intent-centric applications, as we're seeing now, and sort of, and it will be driven a little bit by like problems of our own making, which is what we're seeing right now. But those are like the necessary components of like refining something that will hopefully be very accessible and frankly potentially very familiar. If you can make like a request form payment, or if you can make a binding between like a market participant doing something and like getting paid for it, something that is like as simple as like the Stripe API, like there's a lot of potential to this in one.
I also think it brings in a lot more on the designers and more of the, I would say like those type of roles into the space, because it acts more of a bridge versus the low-level engineering. So that's something that I think we can see a lot more skeuomorphic applications coming to kind of like rely on this architecture to start.
I think people are used, at least developers are broadly used to asynchronous systems in one way, shape, and sense. And so it probably means couching things in terms that they already know of, in terms of interfaces that people can use. I think it's obviously harder with crypto in a few contexts, but I think if there is a means to get developers acquainted with terms that they already know, and get them into to realize the capabilities of some of these systems, that's when we can slowly start thinking about moving beyond to things that are much more core to the Web3 ethos, really.
Great. I think that wraps us up on time. Thanks to the panelists. And I guess we'll open it up for questions, if there's a couple.
Yeah, Zaki made a really interesting point about this ideal world where there's like Lego sort of building blocks that users can construct complex transactions or whatever out of. But it feels to me that there's this like perverse incentive here between users and the application. So from the user's perspective, if I can make, as a market maker, for example, if I can make a limit order and that limit order can exist in like 10 order books at the same time, I've got like 10x capital efficiency, which is great. But from the perspective of the application, it means that I have like more capital flight. The capital is less sticky, users are sort of less sticky in general. So it just seems like something that a lot of applications won't actually want. How do you think about aligning this perverse incentive?
So I do think that there's like, so there's value to verticalizing, right? Like and like we see this in Web3, right? Where, you know, like the Telegram bots verticalize with the block builders is like the sort of classic like MEV-centric world of like, hey, like there's these profound economic incentives towards like verticalizing flow. I think there's like a bunch of questions that so like one question that will be a question is like how much do regulators care? And regulation might just be the factor that pushes against verticalization because verticalization makes you a regulatory target, and people would rather be able to build these things without having as much concern about being like such a natural regulatory target. So that might be one answer. It's probably not a very satisfying answer though because it's unpredictable what will happen. I think there are other questions about, you know, what is the value? Is the value of a front end that like captures a lot of users and captures a lot of order flow, even if, and I think like I am seeing this in like the builder community in terms of DeFi right now. Like more and more DeFi builders are like, okay, let's say we have a DEX. We're willing to route order flow to like whatever execution will get the user, because we like would rather the user like be sticky to you know, our front end and like learn and build that user habit of like coming and bringing their intents and their order flow to our front end, rather than like making them trapped in our execution. And I think almost every DEX team that I know right now is sort of working on the patterns.
So you think like aggregators long-term will have the greatest stickiness?
I think that very few people will make venue-specific like order flow execution apps in general. I think like the only thing I'm working on right now that is like a venue-specific order flow execution app is Penumbra, because like like having private execution is such like a unique set of like preferences that we can't easily generalize it over it at this point. But like we also want to be able to like have like Penumbra, even if a user doesn't want privacy, like we want a user to be able to get execution against Penumbra without having to like specify privacy. But like there does need to be like a privacy specific order flow execute because there's no other way of like generalizing over that preference.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for this panel. So I was hoping to see more jamming around non-DeFi applications. But in case you do want to jam and you have ideas, feel free to join the research forum where we have a really long thread where we're talking about different kinds of applications, novel applications that have not been seen yet, that cannot be built with existing infrastructure, such as public signals, scale-free money, multi-chat, promise graph. In early 2021, 2022, we actually had a lot of other ideas that we just have not yet spoken about. Everything related to coordination mechanisms, solving multipolar traps, solving collective action problems. So there's a lot to talk about. But for now, feel free to join there. And we'll be moving to the coffee and cake break. We have 15 minutes. So I believe that Swiss chocolate is the best in the world, but maybe Belgian chocolate is also good. Let me know what you think. Enjoy the break.